A Chinese surveillance balloon the size of 3 buses traversed the U.S. last week until the military shot it down off the coast of South Carolina. The incident has elevated existing tension between the two countries. Bryan Clark is a senior fellow and director of the Center for Defense Concepts and Technology at the Hudson Institute. Bryan, welcome back.
Thanks, Mimi. Great to be here.
So let's start with the takedown of that balloon. It was an F-22. And it fired a Sidewinder missile. Walk us through that.
So to find the balloon, you have to keep it under visual observation because these balloons have a very small radar signature. There's not very much metal on them. It's hard to use a radar to track them. So you have to watch them. And so they had aircraft basically watching these, the balloon, the entire portion of its flight, and then as it got off the coast of South Carolina, the aircraft got into a position to where they could shoot it if they got the order to do so. The missile they used, the Sidewinder, is an infrared-seeking missile, so it's designed to shoot other aircraft that have a heat signature because they've got engines or they're going fast. The balloon doesn't have either one of those. So to shoot it, you have to actually line the aircraft up in such a way that you're just going to shoot down the line of bearing from the aircraft to the balloon. The missile can't do any real guidance of its own. So you have to just point and shoot, just as like you're shooting a rifle at the balloon. And the missile goes through the balloon, punctures it, and then the payload falls to the ocean.
So it's really not that easy.
No, it's a very difficult proposition. And it took multiple aircraft to be able to both monitor the balloon and then actually do the engagement of it.
And the Sidewinder itself, I looked it up, it's $380,000 for the one missile.
Right.
That's a lot of money. I mean, could we have done this cheaper?
Unfortunately, that's about the cheapest way that we could have done this, at least from the missile perspective. Guns wouldn't really work because you couldn't quite get close enough for the guns to work. The balloon's at about 60,000 feet. The F-22 can almost go to 60,000 feet. So you're shooting up at the balloon. You're having to do it from a couple of miles away, so unclear if guns could really have done the job. So you really needed that's the cheapest missile in the inventory.
The Navy is collecting the debris now.
Correct.
from the ocean. What's that process like?
So the water's pretty shallow right there, and they did this on purpose in an area of shallow water, so 40 to 60 feet deep. So they're sending unmanned underwater vehicles to drive around, underwater drones to survey the bottom and look for objects on the bottom, find metal-like objects that could be debris, and then retrieve those with remotely operated vehicles, little robots like you see on TV, where they will send a robot down there with a cable to it, and they'll grapple things and bring them back up to the surface.
And is that just a cleanup operation, or is there any intelligence that can be gathered from that debris?
Well, it's mostly to gather intelligence, and this is it used to be this is how the U.S. gathered a lot of intelligence on the Soviets during the Cold War. Is things would fall off airplanes, bombs would drop off, missiles would be lost, and you'd recover them from the ocean and then do intelligence analysis on them. So that's the process here: is gather up as much of the debris you can, go take it back to the lab, have the forensic scientists look at it and see what it might have been able to do.
It seems very low tech, this whole balloon thing. I mean, there are satellites, there are spy satellites. Most countries have them. Why do a balloon?
Well, the balloons are interesting. One, they're cheap. So these balloons, are a couple $100,000 depending on what they carry. But they can take a look at things that a satellite can't see. So normally a satellite has a very predictable orbit. So if you expect a spy satellite to come over your location, you stop whatever you're doing while the satellite goes overhead, and then you pick back up again when the satellite leaves. But if there's a balloon overhead, it can remain there for days or weeks or months. So you can't really stop what you're doing, or else you have to just shut down your operation entirely. The other thing, the balloon can look at a closer range, so it gets better pictures, and it can look at different angles than a satellite could. So you really get a much different brand of intelligence from the balloon than you could from a satellite.
Reports were indicating that the president had wanted to shoot it down immediately. The Pentagon said, no, we can't shoot it down over the U.S. because it could harm people on the ground. Is that true? There's a lot of areas of the U.S. that are very sparsely populated.
Sure, there are. Part of the problem is it's 60,000 feet and it's a balloon, so if you puncture the balloon, it's going to drift in a kind of unknown way down to the surface. So it could be a pretty large area that you have to clear. Now that could happen, but we did just see in Poland where an air defense missile, after it blowing up its target, came back to the ground and killed 2 people in a house. where they didn't expect the debris to land. So it's hard to predict exactly where all the debris from the missile and from the balloon are going to end up. So it's probably on the safer side to do this. Now, what they did do is try to jam the communications of the balloon while it transited the United States to prevent it from sending intelligence back to China.
And do we have any indication if that was successful?
Well, the Pentagon says it's successful, or Northcom said it was successful. I expect it was. It wouldn't be very difficult to do that using the jamming capabilities the U.S. military has.
A lot of critics of the administration are saying this balloon should have never been allowed to get over the continental United States. It should have been shot down over the Pacific. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it probably should have been engaged, shot down before it reached U.S. territory. Back during the Cold War, these kinds of overflights were routine under the Open Skies Treaty. That treaty lapsed, and there's not a treaty like that with China, so there's no relationship that allows us to do surveillance of each other. So they should have done something to interdict it before it got over U.S. territory.
And what do you think this means for U.S.-China relations? I mean, things just got a whole lot tenser.
Right, absolutely. Well, it's an example of China continuing to push the envelope like they have over in the South China Sea and East China Sea, the gray zone warfare that they've been mounting, where they sort of stay below the level of combat but try to poke at their opponents to get them to back down and get China more influence and access. That is just another example of that. So at some point we have to figure out how to resist those provocations in a proportional way.
All right. Well, Bryan, thanks so much for being on the program.
My pleasure, Mimi. Great to be here.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it and hit the subscribe button to be the first to watch our latest content. Full shows and more are available on our website at govmatters.tv.